So one of the things about these people is that these blackmails that they do, these are what pushes them into a dark web that requires that blackmail before anybody will let you access it. Basically. So essentially, Satan Man is like basically what I say is we're a witch pedophile male. Essentially, it's theoretically different. Theoretically, most of the time, these ones are just real sadist psychopaths. They're just real sadists as fuck. And like a, the other ones will be like a witch. They'll be sinister and stuff, and that they'll like masochism and shit. These ones are like sadism, and that secretly they'll harbor little boy pedophilia issues, and that builds an ultimate hatred in them, in the little boy, kind of like how those guys hate women. These pigs, they hate little boys. See, those other ones hate women because essentially they just don't get attracted to them anymore, and that they just like to be a misogynist in that way. These ones actually are attracted to the little boys and they hate it because they're so overtly manly and shit. And that they're the ones that do the dick pitching and make prick wieners. Prick wieners are my wiener when it's not hard, it's very shriveled up, tucked up to my body, and then it gets normal penis size when it gets hard. And that comes from years of people pinching my fucking dick. It pissed me off because I would kind of switch psychologically from the amount of psychological abuse and shit. And I would get pissed off, and then they would sit around drinking their fucking Bud Lights laughing at me. Okay? So, I pretty much fucking hate these stupid fucking pigs the most in all the fucking world. So you see that their brain gets all messed up. That's what happens in the magic of the world. So, essentially, the women that fall into the Satan witch, they'll hate the fucking Buffalo Bill kind of guys the most. They will. And that, oh, the kind of person I am will hate these stupid pigs the most. These are the ones that like to take what they call a caterpillar, and then they like to turn them all pissed off and psycho-y and shit, right? And so essentially they do a similar, they teach the hypnotism, they teach, the whole idea is that, they would teach the touching stuff, but they were all my age and shit, so it was a little different. But that essentially every time that I would do that, then one of these fucks would literally hold me down and rape me. Where in Satan Witch, they let all of it add up, and then they have to be raped through all the errors. And that's where long ago I learned that when those kids start doing that, I would just say nothing. I wouldn't touch their groins or anything, and then I would just touch my own groin. And then I would say, bitch, move at their face. And then I would get really fucking defiant at them. And pretty much in every fucking way. Everything about them I built in all ways to be defiant against these people. In all fucking ways. So, but yeah, basically it's the same. And that this is where usually they kill the child at like the sea. So it's like they take the Satan witch to the woods in the mountains, and then they take the Satan boy or the Satan man to the sea, and then they kill the child at the sea. I mean, similar, they have like it's essentially like almost the same major super ritual basically, and then they kill the little boy. And they usually have minions they'll, instead of having sex with the dead boy's body, they'll drink a Bud Light. And then, like, these weird, psychotic little fucking weird pedophiles will sit there and have narcolepsy, you know, sex with that, okay, on that. That's kind of the biggest difference. And that's kind of like where, you know, I could have been that in the end, but essentially I learned how to, like, prevent their ability to do that stuff, basically. And that they still, the whole idea is that in Satanism, the moment you don't follow the rules, then pigs, if they didn't follow the fucking rules, would then have other people that were around that would hold them down and they would rape them into schizophrenics, basically. And so I figured out ways as a child to be causing that, basically. And so that is where I could have easily become one of the child victims that die very easily. I mean, that's pretty much the point of any of those caterpillars or butterflies. Satan caterpillars and Satan butterflies, basically. And that some people refer to them as monarch or MK. And so that is where the ones that live essentially learn how to prevent the Satanists from killing them. And that they basically have, the women's usually kind of dumb, okay, and then the boy is usually just a little boy. And so then 9 times out of 10, basically, they aren't able to comprehend what to do, and that I was able to. And that's kind of like why I have all these scars on my body, for reasons like that. Because I was able to prevent those people from doing what typically happens to children of enchantment. So, the people that do that stuff to women and children and shit, those are the people that, like, I fucking hate the most in all the fucking world. So, these dark webs that these cops use, honestly, these are the blackmails that they have to do to be able to get those. Well, it was supposed to be empty. Nobody was supposed to be ever figuring out how to do that stuff ever again. And that I used to be able to access those because I had an access because of all the scars on my body. And that for the longest time, it would always be empty. And that periodically every year I would look to see, and it would just never have any blackmails in it. Nobody would be using the dark web and shit. And then started having people in it, basically. And so then, since then, they basically restricted my access because pretty much I was like trying to figure out who all those people were. And yeah, that's where they freaked out because I didn't have to blackmail. And the theoretics for me is like that stuff happened to me as a child, and then I don't do that stuff as an adult, and then that is literally why I was able to have access. But they didn't do that stuff as a child. No, they would have had to be, well, either a little girl or a little boy, because they do that. Yeah, they do it in 2 ways, by the way, in Satan Witch. I mean, they usually do it to older women, or in their 20s and 30s and stuff. That's most of the women in Satan Witch. And then there's little girls that they do that to. And see, those little girls usually live because usually all the adult women die. That's it. And so then that's essentially what it is like, where the little boy is essentially has two Jew Satan wives. Usually like an adult prostitute woman, and then like a little girl his own age. That the little girl his own age will be like English and white, and then essentially the older witch will be of some non-white, Jewish, black, Asian, Mexican, Spaniard, Italian, basically. I mean that, or Islamic, basically, and so, or South American and stuff like that, or like a Native American. That's pretty much where, that's the kind of stuff that. That's the kind of stuff that, like, that's what they do. Okay, so in the end, they usually, these people usually have like some black guys that they do all the sex slaving perfectly on the boy, and then they have like a black guy that they do it all weird and shitty. And then they usually kill them. They usually kill both for 2 Jew. And so that's the kind of stuff that they do in Satan Man. And so that's that type of satanic cult. And so that's like, these are the things that like each faction is like allowed to do their own flavor of Satanism. And then all the other ones have to support their version. And that this is what it is that these people sit around acting like, you know, they act like this stuff, it should just be allowed to happen and shit. And they're so used to, you know, in the end, they'll have these rapists, and that usually they end up being like the Satan witch cult. They end up being that eventually. And then they'll have these incest club people. They end up doing psycho club. Better. I mean, this is kind of the progression of Satanism, okay? So this is like where people do certain things, okay? So here's like Rapist Club. Yeah. They end up doing this, which is Satan Witch. This is Incest Club. They end up doing this, which is Psycho Club. And so then this is Pedophile Club. They end up doing Psycho, basically. And then this is Psycho Jeffrey Dahmer Homo Club, basically. Or like John Wayne Gacy kind of people. And they end up being the like dick pincher guys that like to torture little boys. And so that is the progression of typical Satanism. And so then, essentially, the victims of SRA, they're basically, they usually, I mean, not always, but they essentially, they get brought, this would be like the skull and bones. They get like brought, or frats that do a Satan ritual. There's a different one in here. And then this would be kind of Ivy League, skull and bone kind of stuff. And then they get brought in. And they essentially, they do these blackmails real fast, and then they do this satanic cult, basically. And so then these are where essentially women that are SRA victims, they end up doing this stuff. This right here is where essentially this is called cuck witch. And they'll have one of these rapists as like a boyfriend. And then they'll do the snuff film stuff where they hold their eyes open. That causes them to go psycho. That's kind of what those women do. So that's why they end up like hating women. Yeah. So then this is incest witch. They end up like fucking with their brother or their father or something, and then they go psycho. That's why they turn psycho. That's okay. And then this one is homo witch. These ones end up doing like, they'll like literally be the most self-hating lesbian ever. Closeted self-hating lesbians to the point of psychoness. And that they'll usually find like a gay dude, and then they'll mess with their mind. It'll usually be like a John Wayne Gacy type. Then that's like where essentially they end up hating women in a different way, because these women, like, they end up leaving them and becoming like a lesbian or something later on. And then it makes like a huge fool of that person, kind of. And then they end up being weird and hating little boys and stuff. Okay? And so that is, and then up here is pedo witch. So pedo witch essentially is usually dating like a pedophile. And then essentially a pedo witch sits around figuring out ways to fuck up their ability to do pedophilia in the Satan pedophile club. And then that's kind of what like turns those people all psycho. It'd be like a pedophile witch like messes up their little 0-time pedo munch path, and it fucks up their ability to do the pedophilia leadership that year, and then they get all psycho. And then they all do psycho, satanic faction. So that's kind of the progression of those people that do Satanism, right? And so that's where, you know, this is the dynamic that feeds the sociopathness, all this stuff that everybody does, you know, on dark web. I mean, dark web is kind of this. The word dark kind of represents factions like this. And that they essentially have 13 different styles of Satanism. But some you have to like, essentially you can't just, well, like I say, these you like blackmail real fast, and then you're in that one. That's kind of what that is. And so, but most of these people start out in one of these main 4 ones, and that then these women are in these main 4 ones, and that then essentially that pushes people into doing 2 clubs. But you see how this is a full, and that then these women, they usually do all of these, and then it makes a full diamond. And these people, the ones that do like these people do 2 authentic like diamonds. It's supposed to be a diamond. And that these incest people and the ones, the pedophiles and the incestors, they end up doing psycho diamond, and that they have 2 diamonds. And so everybody else kind of has like factions that, are just half diamonds. And so then these become like the real satanic ones, like the real authentic, hardcore satanic ritual, most authentic stuff. These are also, and then theoretically, this is for witches that have a very authentic satanic ritual. Also, the 4 corners, calling the 4 corners, is essentially where a satanic witch's coven is essentially a pedo witch, a cuck witch, a homo witch, and an incest witch. So like the movie, witchcraft movie or whatever, with those high school chicks, or like fuck calling Mano. Essentially what they're calling is Satan Man. They're calling Satan Man to be essentially, Satan Man has an ability of like, see, if you put all these together in like a diamond, Satan Man is then in the middle. And see, that's Satan Man, that's Satan Man, that's Satan Man, and that's Satan Man. And if you put those 4 witches in a witch's coven together, then Satan Man stands in the middle. And what that does is that's what calling Mano kind of represents. And so what that means is that then they essentially don't have to do the satanic ritual, basically. And that's what cuckolding witches is. And that's what a Satan wizard does. That's what Satan Man does. Because see, once you cuckold the witches, then essentially it's not a righteous prairie, but it's not unrighteous. And then it essentially makes it to where they don't have to do any Satan ritual. And so then what that requires sometimes is to have the Satan witch and the Satan man, and then essentially their love stands in the middle, and that then the witches don't have to do the Satan ritual, basically. And that is like what calling Mano means in the movie. Okay, that's kind of what that means. So that is where there's a theoretical fix in to them having to do that stuff. And so that's what that represents. A lot of this stuff is like where these people like to do the Satan rituals. And then in the end, these women end up not liking to have to do that stuff. When they have these kids show up essentially at like a rainbow gathering, then 4 witches will essentially stand around them, and then they'll like kiss or they'll have sex or something, and then that's it. And so that's like literally where a lot of people that do the dark web, making this theoretically happen is very difficult because everybody else has to do like an extreme fucking blackmail. So they make this process very difficult. But that there's a theoretical way for Satan Man and Satan Witch to stand in the fireplace that isn't burning with 4 witches around saying their witch's Satan curse. And that then for Satan Man and Satan Witch to essentially have sex in front of those 4 women. And then that, if recorded, becomes equal to like the most psychotic pedo bangs ever conceived. And see, that's why they don't ever make it easy, because it has to follow satanic rules. And that is where theoretically the witches have a theoretical pedo bang that has them not actually doing anything. And see, in the end, Satanism is ruled by witches. Least. Least is most in Satanism. So the 4 corners of witchcraft is the least pettibang. Okay? And that essentially, if they're ever able to achieve it, it has them with a leadership hierarchy over all of Satanism. So that's... And so, I mean, this is what it is. It's Satanism is based on witchcraft, and that this is what it is. You see how it's the 4 corners? Well, being the expert at this stuff, this is... I'm the expert at this stuff. And then I like to remind people that essentially here is what the representation of Satanism is.